Okay, let us pray. Father in heaven, guide and direct our paths today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Praise the Lord. Let's sing a song of praise. Number 70. 70. Praise the Father for his loving kindness. Tenderly cares he for his errant children. Praise him, ye angels, praise him in the heavens. Praise ye Jehovah. Praise ye the Savior, great is his compassion. Graciously cares he for his chosen people, young men and maidens, ye all men and children. Praise ye the Savior. Praise ye the Spirit, Comforter of Israel, sent of the Father and the Son to bless us. Praise ye the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Praise the eternal tree. 33. Sing a new song to the Lord, he to whom wonders belong. Rejoice in his triumph and tell of his power. Oh, sing a new song to the Lord.
Now to the ends of the earth, see his salvation is shown, and still he remembers his mercy and truth, unchanging in love to his own.
Sing a new song and rejoice. Publish his praises abroad. Let voices and chorus with trumpets and harps on resound of the joy of the Lord.
Join with the hills and the sea, thunders of praise to belong. In judgment and justice, he comes to the earth. Oh, sing a new song to the Lord. Oh,
Amen.
sing a new song to the
Amen. Praise the Lord. 198, and can it be? And can it be that I should gain an interest in the Savior's love? Died he for me, who caused his pain for me, who him to death pursued? Amazing love, how can it be that oh my God should die for me? Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldest die for me?
He left his father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace, emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's helpless race. His mercy all immense and free. For oh my God, it found out me. It was amazing love. How can it be that thou, my God, should die for me?
Long my breath and spirit lay, was bound in nature's night. Thy night is through the quickening ray. I will the dark and flame with light. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? No condemnation now I dread. Jesus in all in him is mine. Alive my living head, and clothed in righteousness divine. All I approach the eternal throne and place the crown to Christ my own. Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, just die for me?
Amen. Praise the Lord. How can it be? And can it be? Praise the Lord. Thank God Jesus died. Okay. 647. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. 647. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of the tables with his sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Oh, God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
In the beauty of the lily, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. Oh, ye swift, my soul, to answer him, be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is my on.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Okay, Brother Venice. Thank you very much for the singing.
Okay. Welcome on and on again. Um, okay, I see Brother Elijah is on. Um, Brother Elijah, we were doing the practical aspect of the medical missionary work this morning. We will be doing knowing about the edible and the medicinal herbs this morning. So if you can, if you want, you can, if you can stay, you can feel free to stay with us until the end. Are you there? If you're speaking with a lighter, okay.
Oh, that's no problem. I'm here. I wasn't sure whether or not I was supposed to be here this morning. Okay.
It's tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good morning,
Pastor. Good morning.
Brother
Nice to hear
Elijah.
your voice.
Okay.
Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to bring you all another video field guide on wild edibles.
The song is gone, Elder.
Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to bring you all another video field guide on wild edible and medicinal plants. In this guide, we will be discussing 7 different plants and 1 mushroom. While this guide is more focused on identification, we will discuss uses of some of these wild edibles. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. One thing we're going to notice right off the bat is these very large globules of flowers that are going to be pink to red. And your field guides are going to say pink to red, but in my experience, they're more of this purplish pink that we are seeing right here. Milkweed is an extremely distinct plant. It's also a very beautiful plant. This plant can be commonly found growing along the edges of fields like cornfields, hayfields, grassy areas, plains and prairies, and things like that. If we take a step back, we're going to notice these bright pink and red globes or globe shapes of flower clusters that are going to indicate common milkweed. And as we can see here, we're looking in the edge of a field. This is actually the edge of a very small clearing that I have in my yard. Right behind it, we have a swamp with some black willows and some other plants growing along the edge. There's even some wild grapes, things like that. So this isn't always indicative of the type of environment, but generally speaking, you want to look in places where there are fields, where there are clearings, where there's prairie type environments, and you're going to be finding a lot of milkweed. You don't want to go real deep into the forest because your odds of finding it are going to decrease dramatically. If we look at the growth form of common milkweed, we're going to notice a couple of things. One of the things we're going to notice about the growth form of common milkweed is how its leaves will grow on opposite sides of the stem, just like we can see right here with these 2 leaves. And the further that we go down the plant, we're going to keep noticing this opposite leaf pattern all the way down the stem of common milkweed. The leaves of common milkweed are very long. They're very elliptical in shape, almost an oval sort of shape, but they're so long that they're going to be considered elliptical. The margins or edges of the leaves are going to be smooth. There are no teeth or lobes on these leaves in any way, shape, or form. Now, these leaves have another very unique feature if we look very closely. If we look at the underside of the leaves on common milkweed, we're going to notice this very bright white prominent vein, versus if we look at the top, we're going to notice the vein isn't near as distinct, but it is tinged with this reddish pinkish hue running all the way through the length of the middle of the leaf. These leaves are very thick. Whenever you feel them in the hand, they have this sort of downy bloom all the way across the surface of the leaf, and this helps them to feel kind of like suede, like if you had a piece of suede in between your fingers and you rub it, or a really thick, heavy piece of toilet paper. And these leaves actually do make pretty good toilet paper because they're so large and they're very broad. They cover the hand very well. However, there are some other unique features to this plant, so let's look at this plant stem to see some of these other features. Now, if we look very closely at the stem of common milkweed, we're going to notice that it's just round. There are no reddish tinges along the stem, but also we might notice this bloomy, like fuzzy substance across the stem. And this is on the leaves as well as the stem of common milkweed. If we look at the flowers of common milkweed from the front, we're going to notice 5 petals in a circular fashion that almost look like they're completely separated, but they're not. They're just all connected on these huge globules that make these circular pods that contain all of the various flowers. And there can be hundreds of flowers on a milkweed plant because all these flowers can come out of the nodes of the leaf stem. And then once we get towards the top of the milkweed plant, we're going to notice even more of these little globules of flowers, and they might become a little bit smaller the further we go up the plant, but the leaves definitely become smaller the further towards the top you get on common milkweed. And this look right here at the very top of this milkweed plant shows just how small these leaves can actually get once we get towards the top. They will retain that very long elliptical shape with the smooth margins, and they'll feel very bloomy or sort of kind of like suede in the hands even at the top. All of the plant will feel this way except for the flower clusters. They will feel basically just like a cluster of flowers within your hands. Now, if we look back off over here, we're going to see some more milkweed plants. These plants are actually about 1.5 feet taller than the one that we're looking at right now. Those guys are probably about 5 feet tall right now, and I'm a good distance away, and I'm leaning back, so it doesn't really look the same on camera, but they are about 5 feet tall. The one that we were just looking at is about 4 feet tall. So common milkweed can grow anywhere from 4 foot tall all the way up to about 5.5 feet tall. I've seen some a few inches taller, and I've seen some a few inches shorter. It just really depends on where they're growing, that particular plant, and things like that. Now this plant is in the Rumex family, which means it's also related to curly dock and our domestic buckwheat. If we look very closely here, what we can see in the nodes of this plant are these seed clusters. This is the very beginning of the seeds of Broadleaf Dock. Now, Broadleaf Dock and Curly Dock both produce seeds like this, and these seeds are technically edible. However, you do have to remove the shell of the seed, which can be an extreme pain, and it's also very time-consuming. But if we look very closely, we can see how many seeds are actually around just this one node. Taking a further look back again, we can see how many of these seed clusters rise up throughout these stalks. And we're going to notice multiple stalks producing seeds and seed clusters at the very top of this plant. This is one of the things that makes it very good for grain manufacturing to make your own flour and breads and things like that. However, you want to keep in mind to use about 15 to 20% of the total amount of flour of this flour in your recipe. So let's take a closer look at this plant and learn how to identify it. If we look very closely at these leaves, we're going to notice how large they are. These leaves are very broad, hence its name Broadleaf Dock, but they're also very long. These leaves are going to be growing in kind of an oval shape or kind of an egg shape, as we can see here. At the very tip, we're going to notice the leaves are going to come to a point. They're not rounded at the tip, they're pointed. The sides or margins of the leaves appear to be smooth from a distance, but the main thing we can see from a distance is how they wave just a little bit. If we look very closely at the margins or the sides of the leaves, we're going to notice this very slightly rippled appearance that we can see right here. And this is simply because of the waves along the sides. We can also notice that these margins are smooth. There are no teeth, there are no lobes of any kind on the sides of these leaves. If we look down here towards the base of the plant, we're going to notice that the leaves are going to get much, much larger. That right there is my hand for a good comparison as far as the size is concerned of these leaves. As we get towards the top of the plant, we're going to notice the leaves becoming smaller with the margins being even more wavy and rippled. Just like we can see on this little leaf here, you can see it's actually a lot smaller than even my index finger. The leaf pattern on Broadleaf Dock is generally an alternating pattern. However, there can be multiple sets of leaves coming out of a node. Like right here, for instance, we can see this leaf petiole coming out right here of this node, and we can also see these other stems coming out as well. And each one of these stems will produce leaves and seed pods. And as we go up those stems, we're going to notice a leaf and another leaf, and they're going to be alternating up the stem. And if we look at this node here, we can see what I'm talking about with this very large broadleaf coming out here, and this other smaller leaf coming out of the exact same node with the stem coming out. So this would be kind of like an opposite pattern, but since they're coming out of the same node and the nodes will alternate, curly dock is considered to have an alternating pattern with its leaves. Right there is a close-up view of what I'm talking about with this leaf and this leaf both coming out of the exact same node that this stem is, and we can even see a small seed cluster starting to develop right here. And whenever we're looking at each node, it's important to pay attention to the base of the node where it connects to the main stem of the plant like we have here. And we're going to notice this little sheath that covers the base of the leaf petiole or the leaf stem. We're also going to notice a color difference. We can see some green, but we can also see this reddish purple tinging occurring right along this portion of the main stem and here along the base of the petiole, going all the way up that petiole with these little bitty spots. Also from this angle, if we look at the petiole, we're going to notice this little distinct groove that runs the length of the petiole or the length of the leaf stem. Another thing that we're going to notice about these leaves is the vein that runs through them in the center is very distinct. It also has a much lighter appearance than the rest of the leaf with this very distinct red purplish tinging running through it, which will get darker once we get towards the base of the leaf, right where it connects to the leaf stem. However, this plant does actually take on a couple of different growth forms, especially in the early spring and mid-spring before it really starts to shoot up its stems or its stalks. So let's take a look at one of those. Now right now we are looking at the rosette, the basal rosette of a broadleaf dock that grows in my yard. This is a very common sight in lawns, especially around where there's been domesticated animals like cows or pigs or horses. Now right away, one of the first things that we're going to notice is the fact that there are a whole lot of leaves here, and this is actually a couple of different plants, but they're very tightly grouped together. These leaves are much whiter than anything else you're going to find in your yard, most likely. On close inspection of these early rosettes, we're going to notice the margins of the leaves have a lot more of these waves to them, just like we can see here on this leaf. And this also gives some people the impression that these leaves are slightly toothed because they can also have, instead of these large ripples, they can also have these very much smaller waves and ripples along the margins that give this slightly toothed appearance. However, these leaves are not toothed. They are smooth on the margins. They just have various sets of waves along their margins, giving this plant a couple of different growth forms and growth patterns to really keep an eye out for. From a far back distance, it's also easier to see all of these big basal rosettes growing in your yard, as I'm sure you guys can tell how easily these actually stick out. Very easy to notice this plant, and it's also extremely easy to identify. This plant is edible in various ways, from its leaves to its shoots to its seeds. Also from a distance, if we look at the older version of Broadleaf Dock, we can see how distinct its growth form and growth pattern is. We can notice those very large, wavy, alternating leaves. We can notice those distinct seed clusters at the very top. And if we compare it to the other plants around, we're going to notice how easily this plant sticks out. The plant that I have in my hand is garlic mustard, or it's known as garlic mustard. There are a couple other common names for this plant, like sauce alone, because it is very good at making sauces, well, alone or all by itself. Garlic mustard is an extremely easy plant to identify, especially because it being in the mustard family, it's also extremely safe to identify, and there are no toxic lookalikes to my knowledge that exist anywhere in the world. Now, I live in the eastern woodlands, and this plant is considered a noxiously invasive weed, so it's important to learn how to identify it. This plant is in the mustard family, and it has the characteristic flowers of a mustard plant, except for the fact that they're white instead of yellow. If we look really closely at these flowers, we can see that they have 4 petals. Now, this is characteristic of a lot of mustards, because most mustards will have 4 flower petals. However, most mustards will have yellow flowers instead of white. The leaves of garlic mustard can be very large. They can also be highly variable, meaning that there's going to be a lot of variations between the leaf shapes on the entire plant. Right now we are looking at one of the lower leaves of garlic mustard. We can see that it has rounded like teeth running along the margins or the edge of the leaf on both sides, and it will also come to a somewhat pointed tip. You will also notice this very distinct cleft right here at the back of the plant where my index finger is going across. This gives the plant what appears to be two lobes at the back of the leaf. However, it is not lobes, it is just a simple feature of the leaves. If we look at the underside of the leaves, we're going to notice they are a little bit whiter in color versus the top of the leaf is dark green or bright green. Now, remember those variations or those variables that I talked about? Let's look at one of the leaves on the top of the plant. Right here at the top of the plant, we can see the leaf is actually a lot more pointed, and so are the teeth running along the margins. This is one of the variations of leaves you're going to find on garlic mustard, are leaves that are rounded and leaves that are extremely pointed. Right now, we're obviously at the top of the plant. Whoops, sorry, garlic mustard. Right now, we are at the top of the plant, and we can see how pointed the teeth on this leaf are and how pointed the tip of the leaf is right here by my pinky. At the very top of the plant, the leaves are going to become a lot more triangular, just like we can see on this leaf right here. As we get down to the base of the plant, we're going to notice that the leaves become a lot more rounded, and the cleft at the back of the petiole of the leaf stem becomes a lot more prominent. However, there are also two different stages of growth that you're going to find garlic mustard in. One of those is the basal stage, which is not in front of me right now. The stage we have in front of us right now is the stem stage because it has this very long plant stem. The closer we get to the ground on the plant of garlic mustard in its stem stage, we're going to notice some of these earlier basal leaves. At the beginning of this plant's growth, there were a lot more of these rounded like leaves. You can see how rounded this leaf is, and we can also see how rounded the teeth running along the margins of this leaf are. We can also notice how round this cleft at the back of the petiole is on the leaf. This is a really good way to help identify your garlic mustard based upon some of the three variations of leaves. So we have three different types of leaves on the garlic mustard plant. The basal rounded leaves with rounded teeth running along the margins, the slightly triangular leaves with a distinct round cleft at the back of the petiole, and these very sharply pointed triangular shaped leaves at the very top of the plant. There are no distinct features about the stem or really about the leaves except for what I've discussed already. The leaves of garlic mustard are alternating all the way up the stem, meaning that you're going to find a leaf stem or a petiole coming out of the main stem of the plant on alternating sides the further you go up the plant. We can notice this here with this leaf right there, this leaf here, and that leaf there, and they will continue to alternate all the way up the plant, all the way to the very top. Some other distinct features of garlic mustard are in each leaf node, the further we get up the plant and the nodes between the leaf stem and the main stem of garlic mustard, we're going to notice some leaves coming out. Later in the year, towards the late summer, these leaves coming out of these nodes are actually going to produce stems, and they're going to produce flowers that will eventually go on to produce seeds. This is part of this plant's reproductive strategy, and it's also part of what makes this plant such a noxious, invasive weed. Now, seeing how this plant is called garlic mustard, its name can also be a little bit confusing for some who try it for the very first time, because there are some distinct things that I've noticed about garlic mustard's flavor. It doesn't taste like normal mustard greens, and it also doesn't always taste highly of garlic. However, it does have some very faint tastes and odors of garlic and of mustard. But there's another flavor in there as well, and that flavor is bitterness. Now, I've noticed the bitterness on garlic mustard can vary from very, very bitter, or it can be extremely garlicky, or it can also be extremely mustard-like. Some plants that I've tried have an extreme garlic flavor or taste, and some of them do not. Some of them are extremely bitter. There are some distinct characteristics to look for, not within the plant itself, but within the environment you find the garlic mustard in, to determine how bitter it will probably be. So let's take a look at some of those features in nature that might cause this plant to be more bitter than other plants. The thing I've noticed about garlic mustard is the more moist the area is, like right now we're looking at the forest floor of a maple and sycamore forest. So there is a lot of moisture here. We can see all these little bitty leaves of Canadian sanicle just starting to grow. We can even see some violets right there and some violet flowers back over here. This is an indicator of high moisture content within the soil. The higher the moisture content within the soil, in my experience, the less bitter garlic mustard will tend to be. Now, it's still going to be bitter. However, I found that in oak forests and in pine forests, the garlic mustard is extremely bitter. Your mileage may vary, but it is important to pay attention to the moisture content of the soil that you are gathering your garlic mustard from. Garlic mustard is an extremely delicious and extremely popular wild edible plant. It's also one of the most nutritious greens that have ever been analyzed according to its nutrients that it has inside. It has a lot more nutrients than our domestic spinach, chard, kale, and things of that nature. So if you're really looking for a highly nutritious plant that also even has protein inside of it, this is a really good one to look for. Remember earlier whenever I said that garlic mustard is also a noxiously invasive weed? This plant is very well known to cause extirpation or loss of habitat to a lot of native wildflowers, and within a few years it can completely take over a forest environment, especially if left unchecked or left alone to reproduce. Each garlic mustard plant can produce anywhere from 20,000 to 70,000 seeds, so you can see how easy it would be for this plant to spread. The seeds are extremely small, and to my knowledge, they cannot be used like our domestic mustard seeds to make a condiment. However, the rest of this plant works very well whenever you boil it, whenever you eat it raw, or whenever you make sauce or condiments or pestos out of the leaves and the flower buds and the flowering tops. The shoots of garlic mustard are also extremely delicious whenever they're boiled. So I've already done a video on how to harvest and prepare your garlic mustard shoots, which is usually the top 4 to 7 inches of the stem whenever it's in its flowering phase. I apologize for the wind here. It has been extremely windy the past several days, and quite frankly, I want it to end. But as we can see, the top of this shoot right here is all very tender and also very delicious if boiled. Garlic mustard is a plant that I usually eat raw, though at times I will definitely boil the leaves, or generally in my preference, I like to actually steam them instead of boiling them in a lot of water. However, my favorite way to consume garlic mustard is raw in salads, on sandwiches, and also very lightly cooked inside of omelets and quiches and quesadillas even. It goes amazing with pretty much everything that I've had it in. Right here on the ground in front of us, we can see a lot of these young, very early leaves or basal leaves of garlic mustard. As we look around the base of this tree, we can see a whole lot of them. This is one of the ways that garlic mustard will spread over many years and take over an entire area. If we look very closely at these leaves, we can see they're very rounded, and some of them are very, very pointed. This is one of the first stages of garlic mustard in its very first year of growth. There are usually 2 years of growth on a garlic mustard plant. This stage that we have right here and the stage that we looked at previously, which is the second year of growth. Since garlic mustard produces a whole lot of seeds, and every seed normally grows, it's best to find the garlic mustard before it goes to seed so you don't find a whole lot of these little guys in the areas that you like to forage in, because if you do leave the garlic mustard there, you are going to lose all of your native wildflowers. So it's extremely important to find this plant, to identify it, know what it is, and cull it or remove it from the environment. Plus, the good thing about harvesting so much garlic mustard is you're never going to run out of a supply. Trout lily is an extremely easy plant to identify. As we walk through the woods, especially moist woods in the early spring, one thing we're going to notice is these lanceolate or ovate shaped leaves coming up through the soil. These leaves are going to have a bunch of purple spots, or what's known as mottled spots, growing up along the leaf. This happens because the trout lily is really good at concentrating phosphorus within its leaves, which is what causes those purple or brownish spots. The edges or the margins of the leaf are going to be smooth. There's not going to be any teeth. There's not going to be any lobes. They're very simple. They're ovate or lanceolate in shape. Very easy to identify by the leaves. However, there are various species of trout lily. If we take a closer look at the trout lily leaf, especially at the underside, if we look at the underside of the leaves, we're not going to notice any spots. This is very common on the yellow-flowered variety or Erythronium americanum. However, if we look at the front side, we're going to notice all of these little mottled spots, all these little reddish-brown spots on the top side of the leaf. If we flip it over, we notice no spots on the underside of the leaf. This is how we can tell the difference between the yellow-flowered variety and the white-flowered variety of trout lily or Erythronium. We can notice whenever we look at these leaves that they're very long, they're very elongated, they're also simple. These are a basal plant, meaning that the leaves are on the base of the plant itself. They're not growing up along a stalk of any kind, they are right up on the ground. So as you're walking through the woods in early spring, pay attention because you're going to see a whole lot of these leaves growing up out of the ground. A really good example of that is if we look right here in front of us, we can see these singular basal leaves coming up out of the ground. We also see some of the early leaves of sanicle right on the tip of my finger. And we also see some spring beauties coming up there. We can see a spring beauty flower right there. This is very indicative of the habitat or environment that trout lily and spring beauty and toothwort and sanicle really love to grow. They really, really love moist woodlands. So when you're in a moist woodland environment, make sure you keep your eyes open for these leaves. However, you might be wondering, what do the flowers of these plants look like? Well, let's take a look at the flower of the trout lily. Now, from a distance, we can see these very nodding shape or these bell-shaped flowers. They're also yellow in color because this is Erythronium americanum. There are several other species of trout lily. There are about 15 species across the United States, to my knowledge. However, the one that I most normally find is the yellow-flowered variety. They're all perfectly edible. There is nothing wrong with any one of these species. However, the glacier lily, which is, to my knowledge, a white-flowered variety, also has the largest bulbs, and that's the part you want to use for food. But you can't use it for food if you don't know how to identify it. So let's take a closer look at this plant in front of us and see what it looks like. As we look a little bit closer here, we can actually see that there are two different trout lilies growing right here along the base of this tree. We can note the nodding shape of these flowers, how they're shaped about like that. They're generally drooping, and the reason that these petals aren't fully opened, because what happens in the sun is these petals will open up and they will curl backwards in the sun. However, in the shade, they have a more bell-like shape to them. These flowers are very characteristic of a lot of various lily species, except for the fact that these generally grow in the woods instead of in your garden like a lot of other ornamental varieties of lily. If we look at the leaves of the plant that's flowering, we're going to notice how long they generally are. By the time the plant or trout lily comes to flower, we're going to notice its leaves being about 6 to 7 inches in length and about 1.5 inches in width. This is very indicative of the species, and usually in the early season, like the plants we saw a second ago, they're going to be very, very small. Once the plant starts to flower, it's going to gain leaves that are very, very large. Like I said earlier, this plant really loves moist environments. It really loves moist habitats. One thing that I've noticed is that south-facing hillsides usually have the earliest blooming plants as far as trout lilies and spring beauties, and they also bloom the earliest mushrooms or morels. South-facing hillsides, because they get more sun in the day coming from this direction. Right now we're looking west. This hillside slopes off to the south, so it receives a lot of run and drain off, or a lot of drainage and runoff coming through down this direction after it rains. This provides a lot of moisture for the trout lilies to bloom a lot earlier than the ones that might be further up the hill that direction. This trout lily in front of us is a prime example of that because the water is coming down this hill towards the south. The sun is coming in generally from the south this direction, and all this water and moisture is collecting right here on the base of this tree, allowing these trout lilies to flower a lot earlier than the other trout lilies within the area. So this is an extremely easy plant to identify, especially if you get out early in the spring, because if you want to get out early in the spring, you want to find the places that you're going to see all of these moisture-loving plants. Main reason because those are the ones that are edible the earliest time of the year. However, if we look off to the left side of us, further towards the south, we're going to notice all of these little bitty shoots coming up. These are the shoots of Solomon seal. This is one of the many species of Solomon seal, and this is a habitat plant that is common as a companion with trout lilies, toothworts, spring beauties, Solomon seals, jack-in-the-pulpits, and other moisture-loving species of wild edibles that you can find in the spring. The shoots of this plant are edible, as are the roots. However, I have not tried the shoots at all in my experience, so I do not know how those taste. But it is another plant to keep in mind, and it is a companion plant to the trout lily that we can see right here in front of us. And I want to do a quick little video for all of you guys just to let you know that this plant is not wild strawberry. I repeat, this is not the wild strawberry. This is actually what's known as snakeberry, or as I like to call it, baneberry. I call it baneberry because it is the bane of a lawn because it spreads so rapidly. It'll actually spread by creeping rootstocks, and it'll slowly colonize an entire area. And it can be a real pain for those trying to grow crops if you don't remove all of those roots. However, it is edible. It's completely safe to eat. It just doesn't really have any flavor. It tastes basically just like water. Very flavorless, very little sugar or sweetness to it at all, and definitely not that distinct strawberry flavor that you would expect from a wild strawberry. It will have the stereotypical, what looks to be wild strawberry berries. Instead of the seeds being on the inside or pitted, they are actually on the outside like we can see here with this rough globule sort of texture. As we look at some of the leaves of this plant, we're going to notice they have three sets, so there are three sets of little leaflets on each one of the leaves, and they're also toothed or serrated teeth going down the margins of each one of the leaflets. And this is part of the reason why a lot of people confuse them with wild strawberries, except for also the fact of these delectable looking little berries. Children love to eat these, and that's a-okay. They're completely safe to eat. There's nothing wrong with eating them. They're not poisonous in any way. Whenever we look at the flower of snakeberry, we're going to notice that it's yellow instead of white. If it was a true wild strawberry, the flower would be white and not yellow. So this is just a quick little heads up to let you guys know. So this is just a quick little heads up to let all of you guys know that this is not wild strawberry, but it is safe to eat and it's not poisonous. This plant has an extremely distinct flower, as you can notice here. It's in the shape of an umbel with white flowers. Now you might be asking yourself, what exactly is an umbel? An umbel is like an upside down umbrella. Right here gives you guys a really good idea of what it looks like whenever you turn it at a silhouette angle. You can see that it is somewhat like an upside down umbrella, which is why it's called an umbel of flowers. The plant that we're looking at today is extremely large and has about 5 or 6 different flower heads on it. Now the flowers of Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot are rather unique not only in their shape, but in the fact that they usually will have a purple floret in the center. Now, whenever we look very closely at this cluster of white flowers, you might notice that there are 5 petals. I apologize for this being out of focus a little bit. This is just very, very hard to show this in detail. But right here on this flower, you guys may be able to notice the 1, 2, 3 petals, and then the 2 very small ones right there at the bottom. I apologize for the shakiness here. This is just really hard because of these things' size. There you can see my index finger, so it gives you an idea of how small these flowers of each one of these individual flowers can actually be. Here's another really good view of what an umbel of flowers would look like, and you can see all of these different branches that each has a cluster of white flowers. Now, another thing that you might notice is the flower bracts underneath the flower, just like you can see. These are very unique in shape, and they're very sharply divided. These flower bracts will go all the way around at the base or the node where the flower joins the very top of the stem, and you will notice this on every flower cluster. And then if we look here from this angle, you guys can see more of those bracts right back in here. Now, another interesting thing to note, remember how I said sometimes you'll see a purple flower or floret in the center? You won't always find that. Note that there isn't one on this umbel right here in my hand. And there also isn't a purple flower in the center of this huge white umbel either. And these are all on the exact same plant. But if we look on this one, we can see that purple floret right there in the center. It looks like a black speck, but that is the purple flower that is distinctive of Queen Anne's lace. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the flowers of Queen Anne's lace, or Daucus carota, let's go ahead and take a look at its very unique leaves. Now, seeing how this plant is a carrot, it is a wild carrot, its leaves look just like domestic carrot leaves. And that's one of the really nice things about this plant, is that it's kind of hard to mistake for something else. Now, it does have a toxic look-alike, and that is poison hemlock. Now, last year, I actually did a video on a comparison between Queen Anne's lace, yarrow, and poison hemlock. So if you're interested, I'll put a link in the description down below, so that way you guys can check that out. Now, the leaves of Queen Anne's lace, or wild carrot, are in a pinnate compound shape, meaning that they're very sharply divided, and sometimes it's going to look like multiple leaves when it's actually one whole leaf, because the leaf is divided into these compound structures. Now, you may notice on this leaf here in front of us how these individual leaflets are very spaced out, whereas on some other leaves, like on this leaf right here, you can see that the leaflets are a lot more close together. So there is going to be some variation within these leaves. Now, another thing that we might notice if we look really close is that each one of these at the tip right here comes to a very sharp point, and there are actually small teeth on the ends of these pinnate compound leaflets. Now, if we look at the leaf stem that holds the leaves, we are going to notice these little hairs running down its length. Another thing that you're going to notice on the leaves of Queen Anne's lace, or Daucus carota, is on the very top of the leaf stem, you're going to see this very distinct groove running all the way down. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the leaves and the flowers, let's take a quick look at the stem of Queen Anne's lace. Now, just like you can see here, the stem is round. There's really no discerning features except for the hairs that you can see right here running all up and down the length of the stem. And every stem on this plant will have these hairs, the leaf stems and the main stems. So that's something important to keep in mind, because poison hemlock does not have these hairs or these fuzz. They feel like bristles. They feel like bristles on like a really small brush. They're kind of stiff, but they're also kind of soft at the same time. They don't prick, they don't make any stings or itching sensations, at least not within me. It's a very easy plant to identify. It also smells like carrot. Most of the entire plant has a faint but very pleasant carrot smell with kind of a sweetness to it. It's really, really nice whenever you smell this plant. It's one of the things that can help you to identify it as Queen Anne's lace. However, that's not something you'd want to try if you think that you might have a hemlock instead of a Queen Anne's lace. Now, you guys might be wondering, where all does Queen Anne's lace grow and how tall does it grow? This plant can grow up to about 6.5, even 7 feet tall in some rare cases. Usually, though, you're going to find it about this tall, which this is about 5.5 feet tall right now. Queen Anne's lace is a field-loving plant, so it usually grows on the edges of clearings, like you can see here on the edge of this woodlot on my property. You can also find it in very large fields. You can find it on the edges of corn and bean fields. You can even find it growing in your lawn. I have quite a bit of it trying to grow in my lawn, for a good example. Now back over there, those white flowers, those huge white bouquet or umbels of flower clusters is some more Queen Anne's lace. So that gives you guys kind of an idea that it can grow on the edges of woodlots. It's a very sun-loving plant, but it also tolerates the shade rather well. So that's kind of a good thing. Now this plant is an edible plant and it's also a medicinal plant. I'm not too sure of its medicinal uses though, so I won't talk about that today. However, I will discuss its edibility for just a split second. The young stalks before the plant has flowered, like you see here, are actually edible raw after you peel off the skin. I don't have any at that stage yet, but it is something to keep in mind that not only the root of this plant is edible, but also the young shoots. Some people have told me that they can't eat the flowers of this plant, but I have never tried that myself, so I can't say whether they taste any good. However, whenever you come to dig up the root of this plant, which you should be doing in the fall, you're going to notice that the root is white and it has a very faint but sweet and pleasant carrot odor to it. You want to dig up the root in the fall because during this time of the year, all the plant's nutrients are up in the plant, and in the fall, it will send all those down to the root. It's a very easy plant to dig up. However, the roots are extremely tiny and can be kind of woody, so they're better for flavoring than really eating as like a carrot substitute. Now right here in front of us, this very small, delicate plant that you see is wood sorrel. This is known as yellow wood sorrel, and there are several various species of wood sorrel that exist within the United States. Yellow wood sorrel is going to be common within your lawn or around gardens, also around the edges of wood lines in parks or in your yard or anywhere else for that matter. Now granted, this plant is called wood sorrel. It's not actually related to sheep sorrel, so that's something to keep in mind, that these are two completely different plants and they shouldn't be confused. Another thing that some people might confuse these with is clovers. They might think they're a species of clover because of the way that they look. However, these are nowhere near related to clovers. This is actually an oxalis species, and it's named oxalis because of the oxalic acid that this plant has. Now, there are a couple good things and bad things about oxalic acid. Another thing to keep in mind with oxalic acid is it can inhibit the absorption of calcium by the body. However, that's not a concern for most people. Now, yellow wood sorrel is generally a very small plant. This is an extremely small specimen here, but it has a great flower that I can show you guys. Wood sorrel will grow anywhere from 1 to 2 inches, all the way up to 6 to 12 inches that I've seen in some cases. It can get quite large, and you can get a lot of leaves from one plant. Okay, now let's take a closer look at some of the leaves of wood sorrel. As you can see, there are 3 leaflets per leaf. Each one of them has a very distinct cleft or a heart-like shape, just like you can see here on all of these leaves. Yellow wood sorrel will usually grow from a single stalk, and its branches will usually alternate up the stem until you get closer towards the top, where you're generally going to notice a very large cluster just like this here. Another interesting thing to note on this wood sorrel, for example, is what's left of the yellow flower as it's closing up, and then this pod, or the fruit, which contains the seeds of wood sorrel. These pods will come after the flowers, and will come from the axils from where the flowers were. Now, there isn't anything that's terribly distinct about these leaves except for their heart shape and their unique cleft and the fact that they slightly resemble clover. Now, right here is a really good side-by-side comparison of a white clover leaf versus a wood sorrel leaf. Here in my left hand is the white clover leaf, and here in the right hand is the yellow wood sorrel that we are discussing today. Another unique difference between white clover and yellow wood sorrel is not only their flower colors, whereas white clover has a white flower, yellow wood sorrel obviously has a yellow flower. But white clover grows in very low colonies on the ground, and it forms like mats, whereas yellow wood sorrel grows in singular plants. They don't grow in mat form. They grow up and form these small stalks, just like this plant here. Now you can see just after a few minutes of me picking this plant for demonstration, you can see its leaves are already wilting and starting to fold. This is another thing about wood sorrel. As soon as you pick it, within about 5 to 10 minutes, its leaves are going to start closing up on you. That's nothing to be afraid of. That's nothing to be concerned about. It's perfectly natural. It's just how this plant works. Okay, so now that we've taken a little bit of a look at the main plant of wood sorrel, let's go back and discuss the plant's flowers. Now, if we look really closely at the flowers of yellow wood sorrel, we're going to notice 5 petals. And violet wood sorrel has the same feature. It has 5 petals as well. However, its flowers are purple or violet. If we look really closely here at the node where this flower started, you can actually see 2 of these small pods starting to form right here. The shape of the flower is kind of like a trumpet or a horn shape if you look at it in a silhouette, just like this. To my knowledge, yellow wood sorrel doesn't have any toxic lookalikes, so that is a good thing. However, it might be different if you live in a country besides the United States. I know here in the eastern woodlands of the United States, we don't have any toxic lookalikes to this plant. So this is a very, very easy and safe plant to teach your children about, and it's also safe to teach anybody who's new to the subject. Now, some of you guys may be wondering what exactly you can do with this plant as far as food. It is very common in wild food literature. However, let's discuss it really briefly. You can take the leaves, the stems, the flowers, and the pods, and you can boil them in water for 5 to 10 minutes and make a really acceptable beverage. It's really good. This plant has a citrusy sort of lemony flavor with a little tartness to it. It's absolutely delicious. You can eat these leaves raw in salads or burgers or wraps or sandwiches. You can cook them up and you can add them to soups and stews for a kind of a lemony flavor that you want, maybe like a chicken soup, or add them to some wood nettle soup would be extremely delicious. You can also take the tea that you would make from boiling this plant and you can make it into syrup or even jelly. It does make a delicious lemony flavored jelly that goes great on buttered toast. And the syrup is awesome with pancakes or over top of ice cream. You can also make a very, very nice ice cream topping by thickening that a little bit and adding some extra sweetener. So I hope that gives you guys a good idea on how to identify yellow wood sorrel and gives you a little bit of an idea as to what to do with it. If you're interested in learning how to make wood sorrel syrup, I'll put a link in the description down below for you guys to check out my video on making wood sorrel syrup. It's called sulfur shelf because it grows in a very shelf-like pattern, just like we can see here. It's also called sulfur shelf because of a yellow stain or a yellow coloration that it will have on the underside of the mushroom. This is a polypore species of mushrooms, and another interesting thing to note is there are some poisonous lookalikes, like the jack-o'-lantern is a really good example. However, the jack-o'-lantern is not a polypore mushroom. You may be asking yourself, what does polypore actually mean? Well, let's take a look at the underside of this mushroom and we'll find out. If we look very closely at the underside of this mushroom, we're going to notice that it's yellow in color, which, like I said earlier, this is where it gets its name, sulfur shelf. The shelf-like pattern and the sulfur-like color of the underside of the mushroom. It is a polypore species, which means it has pores instead of gills. These pores are extremely closed right now. They're very tightly closed right now, which means that this mushroom is really fresh and it hasn't spored out. What that means as far as edibility is that this mushroom is in prime condition for eating. This is an awesome find, and this is a whole lot of chicken of the woods mushroom. If you look at the underside, you might notice what looks like little bitty pores or holes on the underside. That is what makes it a polypore mushroom. So this makes it very easy to differentiate between a chicken of the woods mushroom and a jack-o'-lantern mushroom, or a big laughing gem. There are a couple different species of sulfur shelf. Some of the ones that you might find earlier in the summer, like from June to July, are going to have a white underside instead of a yellow underside like this one in front of us. It's almost the very tail end of August, and this is a really good time of year to find the sulfur shelf mushroom, especially depending on the temperatures. It usually loves temperatures that get down to about 65 degrees in the middle of night, and all the way up to about 70 or 80 in the middle of the day. This mushroom will generally grow on hardwoods. I always find it on rotten oak logs or fallen oak logs, and I'm right past the edge of the oak forest on my property. So this tells me that this log it's growing on is probably an oak. Another thing that we're going to notice about the chicken of the woods mushroom is that on the edges, you're going to see these yellowish bands coming from the outside edge, radiating towards the inside edge of the mushroom. Now this gives us a really good example of how you've got this bright yellow edge, and then you're going to see these white striations following the edge of the mushroom. And it's going to have this sort of rippled appearance, as we can see here, this like fringe-like sort of appearance, how it waves up and down on the very edge of the mushroom, or on the very edge of the mushroom shelf. This mushroom is a very, very large producer. It generally can produce mushrooms weighing of up to 25 pounds. This is also a very extremely meaty mushroom. If we take a look at this one piece that was broken off, we can see just how big and thick this mushroom is. This mushroom is notorious for not shrinking whenever you cook it. It also develops its name, chicken of the woods, because of its taste and because of its flavor. Another reason it has that name is if we peel apart towards the inside, we're going to notice this very white meat that has these long streaks going down, these grains of mushroom flesh running down, that makes it look very similar to chicken breast. Now, another awesome thing about that is it also tastes just like chicken. It truly, truly does. This is an amazing find, and I'm extremely happy to find this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be harvesting this one tonight, and I'm going to be cooking it up. Essentially, when it comes to cooking, you would cook it like you would any other mushroom. Just lightly saute it in butter for about 10 to 15 minutes, and you're generally going to be done. You can add this to pastas of all kinds. You can also add this to casserole dishes because of its very meaty flavor. In Europe, this mushroom is generally used as a replacement for chicken because of its flavor and its very hearty texture. So that concludes our 5th video field guide to wild edibles and medicinal plants, and we also covered a mushroom. I hope all of you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys learned something. If you want to learn more about wild edibles or medicinal plants, or even mushrooms, please make
Okay, you are feel free to ask any questions or any comments. The line is open. Anyone wants to speak?
Morning
But
again. Could we find those here in the Caribbean on the island?
Yes. As you could see, there is sort of tropical herbs as well. You should be able to get them over in Trinidad.
I think I see milkweed. I'm not sure about that carroty one. I know I see them out there, but I cannot differentiate between the hemlock and that because the flower looks so similar. I was told that those things were highly toxic, but now I realize that there are two different species of it. Sister Dawn.
apparently, the queen lace, the hemlock, and the yarrow, they are similar plants.
Yeah, they look
What
the
happened?
flower look the same.
Yeah, look the same. But the poison, hemlock, he says it has hair. It doesn't have the hairs on the
Stem.
stem. Yes, and it's not as hardy as the queen lace. So, you know.
Do we have those here? Do we have those here, Sister Dawn?
I don't know, but we have a plan looking something like it. But in the other video, I think we'll see something else that we may have over here.
Okay.
But this is for now. But we're looking at the local ones. That's not organizing that one.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah. But it's important that you learn to identify the plants. It's most important. You know, the leaves, the shape, the flowers.
Mhm.
It'll help you a whole lot when you go out in your garden or in the bush. So you can look
Yes,
at it and feel
identify.
it.
I'm wondering if I didn't see that clover leaf in
Yeah,
the yard out here, you know. I
it
am
looks
thinking that I
familiar.
see that clover. And now that he's talking about the clover that runs flat on the ground
Yeah.
and the one that grows into a tree, I'm wondering if I didn't see that in the yard here.
So now when you go in your garden, now you look different. Now you go and look.
Yes, yes. You pay more attention
Pay
because
more
now
attention.
this is food. This
Yeah.
is things that will sustain you, so you have to identify them.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
Brother Venice, would you be putting that on the video? Send us the video because I had a little emergency. My alarm was going off saying carbon monoxide and I was looking all over the place. I could not, I had to put it on mute. So, but I see a lot of the plants. I was not able to listen, but I was looking at the plants since I know I have them going on my
That's good.
yes, all of them. And I'm like, oh, wow, these
Oh,
are the
wow.
stuff, and I'm cutting them down and throw them out. Didn't
No,
realize these are something that's
no,
useful. Yes. So I would appreciate if I could get that taping so I could listen to it again
Amen.
and know exactly what they're for and what I need, what care that I should be taking by using them, when using them.
Okay. Yes,
But
yes, I'll post it in the group chat.
but Sister
Thank you.
Evelyn, you still have to pull out a few, you know, because they're going to take over your whole yard.
Okay.
You're really, really crazy. So you have to pull out a few. But don't pull out all because sometimes what happens to them after you take them out, they just stop coming. I've recognized that with parsley and with shining bush. After pulling them out so often, now I have to be fighting to bring them back.
Good morning,
Yeah.
everybody.
Morning. Morning.
Oh, you were just saying good morning, Sister Annie. Who's that?
Good morning. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's go.
Okay, we play the second part of that presentation.
Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to bring you a video on how to identify 5 medicinal plants, as well as talk about some of their uses. And in this video, we're also going to cover what parts of the plants to use and where these plants like to grow. From plants like yarrow and boneset, all the way to the common plantain, which can be found in your yard, all of these plants are easy to identify and they make great medicine. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This is an extremely beautiful summertime plant. This plant's kind of hard for people to find. The main reason is because it's very inconspicuous. You usually don't even notice it. One of the best ways to notice yarrow is those very bright white flowers. They stick out very well the time of year that yarrow usually blooms. In my area, yarrow usually flowers, usually starting at the middle of May, and it'll flower all the way until September in my area, and I live in Indiana. So that should kind of give you an idea of when yarrow will flower in your area. There are a lot of different varieties of yarrow. The wild kind, like you see here, is going to have a white flower. Usually people grow this ornamentally at their house, and you'll see all kinds of different colors like pinks and reds and blues and such. You might even see some white within those as well. I don't know if those have the same uses medicinally. However, they are a form of yarrow. But for safety, it's best to go ahead and use the wild version of yarrow like you see here, this beautiful white flowered version. Anywhere you find one yarrow plant, you're most likely going to find some more. If we take a look at the ground around us right now, we're going to notice a whole bunch of yarrow leaves. And you can see some small yarrow plants here getting ready to bud and start flowering. If we look back here, we can see another plant getting ready to start flowering soon. Yarrow has very distinct leaves. The leaves are very finely cut. You'll notice all these little bitty leaflets running down this stem. Now in your field guides, you're going to be kind of warned about the differences between yarrow and Queen Anne's lace and hemlock. And some of your field guides are going to warn you against using yarrow or Queen Anne's lace if you're a beginner forager. And in my opinion, I don't really quite understand that logic. It's good that they're doing it and trying to keep you to be safe, but poison hemlock doesn't really look anything like yarrow in my opinion. Yarrow's leaves, as you can see, are very fine, very delicate. They have superbly deep cuts. You can see just how delicate these leaves really are. I call these leaves lacy because to me they remind me of like Victorian lace. They're very fine and almost fringe-like. Yarrow has a really nice growth pattern in the sense that the leaves all grow alternating of each other. You'll notice that the leaves alternate all the way up this plant. The stem of yarrow is rather fuzzy. It's kind of stiff and almost woody, if you will. Here you might be able to see the fuzz on the stem. It kind of resembles like a woolly covering, if you will. Yarrow can grow to varying heights. You will find yarrow plants all the way up to 3 feet tall. You can see like this one here. This one's about 3 feet tall. I usually don't find them getting much larger than this in my area, though you might where you live. You can see this little smaller one here growing up that's going to start flowering. And as this plant grows, it's going to continue to grow a little taller and taller until it reaches its end size, which is only maybe another 1.5 feet maybe for this one. Yarrow has a long history of uses all across the world dating back several thousands of years. The plant is named after its supposed discoverer Achilles. Its Latin name is Achillea millefolium. And like I said, it derives that name from Achilles, its supposed discoverer, who was said to have used yarrow on his troops to heal sword gashes and sword wounds. That's one of the many properties of this plant, or one of the many benefits of this plant, is that you can use it as a pain reliever. You can use it to stitch up wounds, so to speak. The plant is such a good astringent, it'll contract the skin so much that it'll actually help seal up rather deep wounds. Plant not also heals pain, but it's also anti-inflammatory. It's also antibacterial, so while at the same time you're healing your cut, you're cleaning it out, and you're reducing swelling anywhere near the trauma area. So that's a really good benefit to this plant. As far as using yarrow, you can use the entire herb. The entire above ground part of the plant is supposed to be used. A quick note of caution though with yarrow, yarrow does contain 2-hone. The fresh plant contains the most 2-hone. After it's dried, the 2-hone is released. 2-hone is known as the active compound within absinthe. 2-hone exists in very large quantities in plants like wormwood as well. And those kind of plants are known because of their effects. 2-hone can kind of make you feel really drunk, and it can, if you take too much, make you hallucinate, so that's something to keep in mind. So whenever you make your yarrow tea or your yarrow tincture, it's a good idea to use the dried plant. However, using some of the fresh plant won't hurt too much because the 2-hone and yarrow will get dissolved by steeping it in hot water. So that's something else to keep in mind. Unfortunately though, yarrow is rather bitter in taste, so if you make a tea out of it, kind of be cautious of that. Yarrow does have its own distinct smell, though in my opinion it's really hard to describe. It's very aromatic when you smell it, kind of smelling almost like some sort of perfume. There's an astringency to it, or like a tannic smell. I don't think this plant actually has tannins, but it reminds me of the smell of whenever I'm leaching acorns. So if you've ever leached acorns, you might know what that smells like. But it smells very, very good whenever you crush the flowers or the leaves or even the stem. You can crush any part of the plant in your fingers, crush it and rub it between your fingers and take a smell. And you're going to smell this really aromatic smell that, like I said, is really hard to describe. And today, I want to bring you an identification video on common mullein, or Verbascum thaspis, as it's known by its scientific name. The plant that we're looking at with this very tall flower spike and these yellow flowers is common mullein. There are a couple different ways that you can tell this, but one of the first and foremost is its very distinct flower buds with these flowers growing on it. It grows in a very long spike, just like you can see on this plant right in front of us. Now if we look very closely at these flower buds on this flower spike, we're going to notice that they look somewhat kind of like hops flowers. They're very bulbous, and they almost look somewhat like Brussels sprout as well. And however, this is just the flower buds, which means that the flowers, like this little yellow one, are going to be coming in and out. Now, the mullein flowers really interestingly, and I say that just because its flowers will pop out at different times. You won't always see all of the flower buds on one spike flowering at the same time. As a matter of fact, I never have. You usually will find the flowers growing somewhat like this, where you're going to see a few flowers at a time. And once you get towards the very top of the flower spike, you're going to notice this conical-like point that it comes to. Now, one thing you're going to notice if you look up close at the flower buds, you're going to notice that they're also very hairy. They're kind of a light green in color, and they're very, very fuzzy. Now, that's an interesting feature to this entire plant because the entire plant has this fuzz from the stems. Whoops, I just lost a flower there. From the stems to the flower buds and the leaves. The only plant part that doesn't have those fuzz is the actual flowers themselves. Mullane's flowers are very distinct in the sense of their yellow color. There are a lot of plants with yellow flowers, so just because you see a plant with a yellow flower like this doesn't mean it's Mullane. However, if you see this distinct stalk, this distinct flower stalk, then it most likely will be a Mullane. I don't know of any other plant that has this distinct flower stalk. And the flowers being yellow, they will have 5 petals, just like you can see on this flower right here in front of us. Granted, it's starting to close up now, but it does have 5 petals. You can even see the pistils or stamens inside of the flower there. You're going to notice a lot of ants. Main reason for that is that ants really love Mullane for some reason. I don't know why, but they absolutely adore it. A couple interesting things to know about Mullane is one, that it really loves clearings and it also loves poor soils. This plant will generally grow well where not many other plants will. It's also a biennial, which means that in its second year it will go to flower like we can see right here. So what that means is this plant is 2 years old, whereas if you look around you might find a basal rosette of Mullane. Now right here is a really good example of a basal rosette of Mullane leaves. They're very large and they're very fuzzy. And they grow in a rosette, which means they grow in a circular pattern around the stem. Now this is a first-year plant, so it's not going to flower this year. But that gives me an idea of when to come back if I'm looking for this exact plant, or if I see this plant and I don't see any flower stalks in the area, then that tells me all the plants in that area are 1 year old. So that's kind of good information to know. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the flower buds and the flowers themselves of Mullane, let's talk a little bit about its leaves and the features of its stem. Now, one thing to note about the leaves of common Mullane is that they are very large and ovate in shape. They're somewhat oval and they will come to a little bit of a point, so you might describe them as a really big lance point, but they're so large they're usually described in your field guides as ovate in structure. They are simple along the margins, meaning they have no teeth. There's no lobes or any discerning features upon the sides of these leaves, just like you can see on this leaf in my hand. However, these leaves are very fuzzy, they're very soft, they feel somewhat like felt or velvet. So this is a really nice feature to this plant because there's not too many plants that I know of that look just like Mullane with this feature. So that makes it an easy plant to identify. Another good use about these leaves with them being so soft is that they make excellent toilet paper. Mullane is commonly referred to as cowboy's toilet paper because of how soft these leaves really are. They feel like big pads between your fingers. They're so soft. Another common name for this plant is lamb's ear because the leaves are so soft they remind people of the ear of a baby lamb. Now here's a really good look of the underside of one of the leaf nodes where it joins the stem, and here you can see those little hairs and those little fuzz running down, and you may also see part of the leaf margin coming down the stem just like this. And on this plant right in front of us, this runs all the way down the stem. See, there's the margin of a leaf, and we follow that margin down, and then it connects to the stem. Now once we get down towards the bottom of a second-year plant, we're going to notice how large these leaves can actually get. If you look at this leaf in my hand, it's probably about 2 to 3 times larger than my hand is. So this is an extremely large leaf, and this is very indicative of common Mullane. The leaves of common Mullane usually grow in an alternating pattern up the stem. However, they can appear opposite, and this is a really good example. But if we look closely at where these two join the main stem, we can actually see the one on the left joins the stem at a node much higher than the one on the right. And then if we continue to go down the plant, we're going to notice these alternating leaves from one side to the other, all the way down the entire plant. Mullane is a very tall growing plant. It can grow anywhere from 6 to 7 feet tall. And this plant in front of me is close to about 4.5, 5 feet tall right now. It's probably not going to grow much larger just because of where it's at. However, on the sides of the roads, you might find them quite a bit bigger, like I said, up to about 7 feet. Now you may also be wondering what it is you can do with mullein. Mullein is a very popular medicinal plant. It's actually native to Europe, and it's considered an invasive plant here in the United States, but it is a very useful medicinal plant. This plant's very mild in its flavor. It's a very good expectorant, which means it helps to expel mucus from the lungs and the mucous membranes like in your nose and things like that. This is really good for clearing up chest congestion. This is also really good for any respiratory ailment because it does have some immune boosting properties to it as well. So whenever you want to use common mullein, what parts exactly would you use? You can use the entire plant. The entire plant is usable from its flowers to its flower buds to its stems and its leaves. Its root is even usable as well. You can use this plant to make teas or tinctures. You can use it to make salves if you really wanted to. It doesn't have much of a use for salves. Its main use is for teas and tinctures. And to make the tea, you can either use the fresh plant or the dried plant. And the same with the tinctures. You can use the dried or fresh plant for tinctures. So that's really nice because it has a lot of multiple uses and you can use it different ways. There's not a specific way to use it as in it has to be dried or it has to be fresh. However, it is better to prepare the tea from dried mullein and to make the tincture from fresh mullein for some people. But it may not be that way for everybody. So it is worth it to experiment just a little bit. And today, I want to bring you an identification video on jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. The plant that we're looking at is jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not, and it gets its name from the spots inside of the flower, inside of the throat of the flower, and from its seed pod, which is starting to develop right here. Whenever the seed pod is fully developed, whenever you touch them, it will burst open with seed pods, hence the name touch-me-not. Jewelweed is an extremely common and very popular medicinal herb for treating poison ivy rash and bug bites and insect stings. A lot of people really like this plant for that reason, and it does work rather well according to a lot of people. So how exactly do you identify jewelweed? Well, this is a really easy plant to identify, so let's take a look at some of its features. The leaves of jewelweed are going to grow in an oval shape or somewhat of a lance shape whenever you look at the silhouette of the leaves. And whenever you look at the margins of the leaves, like we can see following my thumb right here, you can see these very slight teeth that run down the margin of the leaf. As we look down from the top of the stem on jewelweed, we're going to notice that its leaves will grow in an alternating pattern. You can see how these leaves alternate up the stem, and they will do this all the way up the stem of the plant. So this plant, so jewelweed has an alternating pattern with its leaves growing up the stem, and its leaves are in this oval shape with a very slight toothed margin, just like you can see here. Now something else you're going to notice on jewelweed is the red tinging that goes up the leaf meristem, or the main leaf stem, that goes to the petiole of the leaf, and you can see this red tinging on this stem right here. And as we get up the plant towards the top, that tinging is going to be less noticeable. It's going to be less distinct. Just like you can see on these here, it's a little bit lighter in its color. Then as we go down the plant, you're going to notice that tinging becomes even more distinct, and it will run the whole length of the leaf stem all the way to the main stem of the plant. Whenever we look at the flower of jewelweed, we're going to notice 3 petals. The bottom 2 are going to be hanging down, just like we can see right here. And then the top 1 is going to be up like this. And then the rest of the flower goes back in this shoe or horn or trumpet-like shape with this little spathe, which is what this little curlicue towards the very back of the flower by my thumb is called. It's called the spathe of the flower. As we look inside the throat of the flower, we're going to notice these little spots that go from orange to this dark red. And this is a very distinct feature of jewelweed, and even the yellow flowered version will have this. Now, one thing you might want to note on this species, it does have an orange flower. However, it's somewhat yellow and red with these reddish-like spots towards the very back of the horn shape, just like we can see on this one. Now, after this plant flowers and it gets pollinated, it will produce its seed pods. You can see the seed pod is this little bitty round lentil-looking thing by my thumb. Now, what's interesting about these seed pods is that whenever these seed pods are fully formed and they're full of seeds, all you have to do is very lightly touch them and they will burst open, which is why it gets its name touch-me-not or spotted touch-me-not, because of the spots along the flower and inside of the throat, and then this very delicate seed pod that it will form. The stem of jewelweed is round in shape. There's not too many discerning features about the shape of its stem. However, it does have this somewhat translucent look. Just like if we look on this one here, we can actually see it looks somewhat translucent or semi-translucent. And that's because of the amount of water that this plant has within it. What happens with jewelweed is that whenever it rains, this plant will actually suck up a lot of water, which makes it extremely juicy. And if we follow the stem down, we can actually see the swelling starting to take place here at this upper node of the leaf axis along with the stem. And what's interesting is this is where the water will collect within jewelweed. So if you are suffering from any ailment where you want to use jewelweed topically, this is some of the best section to use, especially right off the plant fresh. So let's test this out a little bit. Let's pluck this off. And then you guys can see all of this juice. Look at all of this juice that I'm able to squeeze out of here just at the small little section. And this is exactly what you want to use on your skin whenever you have a sunburn or poison ivy rash or a bug bite. You can use this along with plantain, and these juices are really, really good for the skin for helping to relieve those ailments. And you can see just how juicy this plant actually can be. And this is the very top node. However, if we simply just go down the plant, you can see what I picked off here, and we follow the plant down, we're going to notice these nodes and these bumps getting larger and larger as we go down the plant. And these are the juiciest parts of the stem of jewelweed, and this is why the stem, along with the crushed leaves of jewelweed, is extremely useful. Whenever we follow the stem down to a leaf axil, like we're at right here, we're going to see a very large stem and a very small stem with one leaf. And the reason this is while jewelweed is actually growing, what it will do is it will send out these small little one-section leaves, just like this here, so that way the plant can gain through photosynthesis, and it can shoot out these larger leaves, which will then terminate in these axils, just like you can see on this one here. And then if we go up, we're going to find another large axil. And each one of these axils can produce flowers and seed pods. And this is part of the plant's reproductive and survival strategy, so that way it can continue to reproduce and it can continue to live. Whenever you guys find a whole lot of jewelweed plants, it's also really helpful to look on the ground for some of the younger plants like we can see right here. This plant is growing about 12 inches tall right now, whereas the rest of the jewelweed is approximately 3.5 feet tall. So anywhere you find jewelweed, you're going to find it spreading out, and you're going to be finding these very small, lush, and very dense plants with all this dense foliage. And we can notice how it still has these very lance and oval-shaped leaves with these dull teeth running along the margins. Its leafing pattern happens in an alternate shape or an alternate form, so these leaves will alternate all the way up and down the stem. We can see this one very large leaf axil with all these leaves, and we can also see these very young small ones. So this lets us know that it is jewelweed. And if we look closer at the stem, we're going to notice that it has this translucent sort of appearance to it, and it's very juicy whenever we go to break into it. Now you guys might be wondering what kind of environment jewelweed can grow in and how tall this plant can actually grow. I have seen jewelweed growing as tall as 5.5 to 6 feet tall. I'm sure it can probably grow even taller than that. Right here, these plants in front of me, the angle's a little bit deceiving. However, these plants in front of me are about 4.5 feet tall. However, if we look back over here, we can actually see these plants are a little bit taller. These plants are about 5 to 5.5 feet tall right now. They're about equal to my shoulders or to my neck level. So this plant can grow really tall. So what kind of environments does jewelweed generally like to grow in? I will usually find my jewelweed growing on the edges of woods where it's really moist, where there's a lot of drainage or there's a lot of runoff of water whenever it rains excessively. This plant really loves shaded and moist environments. The area that all of this jewelweed is growing, and you can see all this jewelweed right here in front of us, all this jewelweed is growing in a shaded environment. It's constantly shaded here, and it's constantly wet. The soil is very, very moist. So let's go over here a little bit further. And we can also see some more jewelweed growing here with these very distinct orange flowers. We can even see the silhouette, this triangular sort of silhouette that the flowers will have of jewelweed. We can see all these flowers at the lower nodes of the stem, and we can even see that very enlarged node there on this stem right here from all the water that jewelweed has sucked up. So that's how you guys can identify jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. I've covered this plant in a couple of other videos, and I'll put those in the description below if you guys are interested. And today I want to bring you an identification video on the wild plantain. Now within the United States, there are two different types of plantain that you're probably going to be running across more often than not. Now the plant that we're looking at here is Broadleaf Plantain, or Plantago major. Now each plantain is very easy to identify, and there aren't any lookalikes to my knowledge within the United States. This is called Broadleaf Plantain because, as you can see, it has these very broad oval or egg-shaped leaves. You can see they're shaped just like an egg, and the veins in these leaves, as you can see, start at one point at the petiole of the leaf stem, and then they rise outward. They radiate a little bit outward, and then they all come together towards the tip of the plant. Now the sides or the margins of the leaves of plantain are going to be smooth. You're not going to see any teeth or serrations along the edges or the margins of these leaves. However, you may notice, like you can see here in this one, the sides or margins of the leaves can be a little wavy in look or appearance. Now earlier in the year, this plant has a flower spike, a very distinct flower spike that's coming up out of the center of the rosette. However, it doesn't have its flower spike now, but I will put a picture down below in the right-hand corner so you guys can see what that looks like. Now, the broadleaf plantain usually grows in a basal rosette pattern. As you can see here, these leaves are growing in a circle around the main taproot of the plant, and that's what makes this a basal rosette. One of the good things about plantain, as you can see here, is it's constantly spitting up new, tender young leaves, just like you can see this little bitty guy here. And the good thing about that is this plant is not only edible, but it's also medicinal. And the edible parts of the plant are these young tender leaves before they get too stringy. Whereas here on this big leaf, you can see these huge veins that run through this leaf. And these veins are responsible for the strings, which you can see those strings on the backside of the plant here. Now, broadleaf plantain and narrowleaf plantain are both in the exact same family that commercial psyllium is gathered from. And here you can see the seed spike that's left from Plantago major, and these seeds can be undoubtedly used the same way as psyllium husks or psyllium fiber. And that's one of the many uses of this plant for food, besides using the young tender leaves for a salad, is that you can use these seeds as a psyllium substitute. And now when it comes to medicine, this plant is very well known within the herbal community because of how effective it is, as well as how mild and gentle and safe this plant is whenever you use it for medicine. This plant can be used for medicine internally and externally. So that's a really, really good thing about this plant. As far as using it, it's useful for an astringent. It's very, very good for drawing out infections or boils or zits. You can use this to make a rheumatism wash or a poultice. This will help to cool the pain of rheumatism. This will help to relieve inflammation of burns, insect stings, and things of that sort because it is very cooling. It's astringent in nature, which means that it contracts the skin or it has contracting agents within it. So if you need to check diarrhea, this plant can help do that. Also, its leaves and root is very high in mucilage, so this plant is also very soothing to inflame mucous membranes of the mouth and throat. And that's another thing this plant can be used for, is for colds and flus to help you ease the discomfort or hoarseness of your sore throat. And when it comes to using the plant for medicine, the entire plant can be used. You can use the leaves, you can use the stem, you can use the flowers, you can use the seeds, you can use the root, you can use all of this plant for medicine. However, my favorite thing to do is just pluck off any good looking leaves like you can see here, because this plant will continue to put out new leaves all throughout the entire growing season. So the good thing about that is if you just keep plucking the leaves, you're going to have a constant supply of plantain growing in your yard. Whereas if you take the root, you are going to kill that plant. Not to worry though, because this is a noxious weed, and as a matter of fact, the natives of North America called this plant white man's foot, because it went everywhere we went. So this plant is extremely noxious, and you're not going to kill it in any way. Now the second major type of plantain that you're going to be running across is called longleaf or narrowleaf plantain, or Plantago Lanciolata. Now as you can see here, it looks somewhat similar to the broadleaf plantain or Plantago major in the fact that it does grow in a basal rosette around the taproot of the plant. The veins of the leaf, which are responsible for strings, all start at the petiole and run somewhat parallel to each other all the way to the very tip of the leaf. Longleaf plantain has very long, linear-shaped leaves, as you can see here, and the sides, or the margin of the leaf, is going to be smooth. You're not going to notice any teeth or serrations on these leaves either. However, as you may notice here, you may see on the surface of the leaves all of these little bitty hairs, or little fuzz. And you may notice how the underside of the leaves on narrowleaf plantain are smooth. They don't have any of those hairs. However, those discerning ribs or veins are still there, and these are responsible for the strings in this plant as well. Just like its larger-leaved brother, this plant will spit up new leaves all throughout the growing season, so that makes it a really, really good plant to use for medicine. You can use all of this plant, including the root. However, I like to harvest it the same way. I like to just use the very tips of these young leaves and any good-looking leaves like you can see here. The reason I like to do that is because, again, this plant will continue to spit up leaves all throughout the growing season, so I have a continuing supply of these plants. Another unique feature about plantain is on the petiole towards the base of the root, you're going to notice usually a red tinge or a purple tinge like you can see here, and it's going to fade as it goes up and turns into the leaf itself. On some leaves, this tinge may be very dark like you can see here, or it may be very light like you can see here. On some leaves, it can be absent altogether, like you see in this one here. Now this plant shares a lot of similar uses with its larger leaf brother. However, a lot of people end up using this plant more often than broadleaf plantain, and some field guides and some sources will say this plant is just a little bit more effective. In my experience though, I don't notice much of a difference in the effectiveness between narrowleaf plantain and broadleaf plantain. So that's something you may want to keep in mind and something you may want to experiment with. Usually I use both of these plants together anytime I'm using plantain. I'm sitting outside in a huge field, and I thought I'd bring you guys an identification video on boneset. What you're looking at right now is called boneset. This is a very medicinal plant. This plant is extremely good for colds and flus. It's also good for bone bumps, like if you get a bruise or on your bone, or maybe you've got like arthritis or something. This plant is really good for that. There are a couple different ways you can identify boneset. The easiest, obviously, is these white flowers. You can see there is a lot of flowers here on this one plant, and this is all one plant. But if you look closely at these flowers, you'll notice all these little stamens, all these little spikes. The stem of boneset is extremely hairy. I'm sure you can notice that here, all those little bitty hairs. The leaves of boneset go around the stem. The stem perforates the leaves. Here you can see a fold in the leaf on both sides, right where the stem meets. And here is an underside view of the leaf and stem section of boneset. Here's a different angle of the stem perforating the leaves. Whenever you feel these leaves, you'll notice that they feel kind of leathery. They feel almost kind of like buckskin, in my opinion, on the top. The underside feels kind of fuzzy. And here you'll notice the fuzz, or the little hairs, on the underside of the leaves of boneset. You'll see the vein, the main vein, is very prominent on the backside of the leaf, whereas on the top, it's just a crease. The leaves are very long, they are lance-shaped, and they are toothed. Now, the area I'm in, it stays really moist, so you're going to find boneset in clearings that are moist. You're not going to find it in dry, high fields where you're going to find like echinacea or things like that. It's a really easy plant to identify. You can find it pretty much anywhere. The places it really likes to grow, though, these are the kind of areas where boneset likes to grow. This is just a huge clearing in between two tree lines. The parts that you want to use on boneset are the flowers and the leaves. Those are the most medicinal parts, and you want to use those dried. So there's 5 medicinal plants that are really easy to identify, how to identify them, and how to use them. I thank all of you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you want to learn more about wild edibles or medicinal plants, please make sure to subscribe. And if you want to support the channel even further, make sure to check out my Patreon page where I share some extra perks with you guys as well.
Okay, so you could go ahead and unmute if you have any comments or questions.
Morning. It surprises me with the touch me not plant, because I was looking at the benefits. I been in an election, he was talking about the benefits of the touch me not. But when I saw their plant, what they call touch me not, is completely different from what we call touch me not. And I'm like, wondering which one the touch me not was the actual one. What was talking about on the lecture, because we have the same name, but the plant is completely different. So I guess when we looking at herbs, even though we may call it that, it's nice to check it up, make sure, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. That is why we look at the botanical name. What you call touch me not in the Caribbean is what we call Mimosa peduca. And that touch me is a different plant in a temperate country. Right, so this is this is edibles in the wild. Yes.
Right, because the touch me not plant has the leaves. When you touch it, it falls.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one I'm used to.
Yeah. Okay. You have a thing on that one.
What we call Mary shut you door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it called tamari too?
Yes.
Yeah, tamari. Mm-hmm. I suppose they probably have many of those species. We just know one of them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think the properties are even different. They have different medicinal value.
Yes. You remember these are in the wild. Let's say go in the wild. When you go in the wild, that's the good chance.
There's so many different varieties.
Right. So when you're going on an excursion or a walk now, you will look at the plants differently. You look at the feel, the touch.
Yeah, what I have learned too as well in that sunshine presentation that I did is that God is so great, God is so wonderful that in every region, what you need in the plant is most available in the plant in the area where you are.
Amen. So it'll live on their
So
own fig tree.
yes, so where you want maybe more omega-3, the plant will have more omega-3, let's just say in Europe, where you are there. And it varies if it's omega-6 or whatever it is. Where you are, the most valuable part of the plant, you will have it there.
Yeah.
Question. Do we find these plants down here in Trinidad?
I know we have the plantain, what we call plantain. I know we have that one.
Yeah, we have it too, but I was wondering about the mullein. Because I'm like, what? I wonder if any other Caribbean may grow mullein. Because I was kind of curious if it's grow in the Caribbean area.
And I'm not sure. Not sure.
But I think I see that thing. I have to go back and look at that thing because I think I see that, if that is more, I will be
Looking so
fully
familiar.
like
I think you must have it.
because there's a part that we go walking, and on that part have all kinds of wild things. I see the what you call it, the one opposite to the hemlock. What's that one? What's the name of that one?
There's the queen lace.
Yeah, the queen lace. I don't know whether it's hemlock or queen lace because I thought
The wild
hemlock.
carrot.
Yeah,
The
the
wild carrot. The wild carrot. Yeah.
I don't know if that is wild carrot or hemlock. And now I have to go now that I know, I can go now and pay more attention to see what it is.
So it's three of them, It's the yarrow, the wild carrot, and the hemlock. All of them. All three.
But the yarrow is really good too. The only one that is bad is the hemlock.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So if that is mullein, well, you're like going to harvest a whole thing of that.
Yes. It looks familiar. It looking familiar like we have it here.
Yeah, that thing looks, it looks like a lily. There's a particular kind of lily that has that long stalk.
Yeah.
And then the flowers come out on the other side. I think that is available here, I think so.
What
It's just that you're not aware. Now that you're aware, you will pay more attention.
Yes. Yes. So now when you go to hikes and so, and you go into the area, you always got to look through the herbs that they pass.
Go through the bush. But since I've been aware, and I had Google Lens and my camera, but Google Lens not working so good these days. But since I had Google Lens and my camera, now everywhere I'm looking and I'm testing and I'm checking to see what is what. But I don't know what
I do that too.
I think I'm going to pay for the plant identification app. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, as for me, seeing that I in Andros, and Andros is more, it's not so developed, and we have a lot of wild edibles here. I normally you take a picture of it and use the Leaf Snap app to help identify some of the plants.
What
I don't know.
It's a charity, the Leaf Snap app.
Yeah, you can go in your Play Store and download it.
Okay.
The Leaf Snap.
Okay. Google is not looking so good, and there's another one, but now they want you to pay for it. So I'm going to look for that. Thank you for telling me.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much, Sister Charity. So there may be a lot of herbs that we don't know what we cut down. So now we have to look to everything, the wild edibles. What was interesting was the cowboy toilet paper. You know what you talk about?
Yes, that is they have said putting leaves of the willow plant, but I don't know if we have the willow plant here. The leaves of the willow is very soft, so you can use it for toilet paper as well. But now we have to go look for that plant and plant it if we find it.
It have some plants have some broadleaf that we could use for.
Just make sure not poisonous.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. Make sure it's not poisonous. That's why you have to go.
Itchy. Oh, itchy.
Yeah. Because when that's what we have to use. We have to get herbs for that. Plants have to be used in that purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was really good, valuable information.
Yeah. So now you look through your eye. You look through now with a different eye. You're not going to pass any by the side. Look at every plant.
No, I'm afraid to pull weed, I'm really afraid to pull weed. As a matter of fact, some time ago, I was outside. I hate nut grass. How I hate nut grass. And then one day, Sister Judith passed, we were talking, and I was talking about this nut grass. I'm pulling out this nut grass, whatever. She said, "You have nut grass in here?" I said, "Yes, I do." And I'm pulling it out. She said, "Save the nuts. Save the nuts and leave the nuts." What you want nut grass nuts for? She said, "That's very good for the reproductive system."
Yeah, for women.
It helps. Yes. And I said, "What? That's purpose?" She said, "You wouldn't believe it." I said, "Yeah, with a passion." And I did, take it and wash it and keep it for her. And she was so happy. So now I'm looking at nut grass with a different eye. Believe that or not. I'm looking at nut grass with respect.
You tasted it?
Because it's so beneficial, so valuable.
Did you taste it?
No.
You was afraid?
It's better? No, I was looking at it for my niece. She was having some issues with some trouble. So I was looking to the remedy with the nut grass and the what root it is.
Is it not?
Yes, it's not right, and something else. So she was telling me about it. And I was getting it from her. So she brought the other things for me together with the nut grass what I had.
Okay.
But she kept some for herself as well. She was making something for Judith.
Yeah. Okay.
Sister Gail, could you tell me the name of the app again? I'm trying to remember it. The leaf, to find the leaves.
Leaf Snap. Leaf Snap app.
Thank you.
I'll post the link in the group. Let me do it now.
Thank you very much, Sister Charity.
Is that all? Any more comments? Any more questions? Okay, Sister Charity did send it in the group chat. The link. But Sister Charity, that's for those with Google with Android operating system. Let me see that. Yeah.
Brother Bernice,
Yes, I'm
if you
there,
don't have
sister.
an Android, then you have to get a good phone, okay?
Now, I don't know. I get a very inexpensive one, and then I just went to Play Store and it was there, so I just downloaded it. And
Yeah.
I'm using it free, of course. I guess they have a where you can pay to upgrade it to, more additional
Okay,
plans. I use so
okay.
far, but yeah.
That's what I said. I think I'm going to pay for it. I hope it's not a hoax, but I hope I do. I can pay because sometimes you use it in the beginning and then after that you get trouble using it because they want you to pay for it.
Now I've been using it for about 2 years now, and I'm still
Okay.
using it. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm going to look for it as soon as we come off here. Because that one now is giving some real trouble. Google Lens. I don't know what they did with Google Lens. It probably got bright.
Okay, we can close up from here.
Before you close, Elder, any idea what your reading is for this evening?
Oh no, I don't think they presented anything that they will be presenting on. Sister Dawn.
The group didn't do anything, didn't say which chapter.
Yes, well, Sister Kim, hold on.